Hello, friends. Today on Mind Your Manners, we welcome three distinguished guests to our virtual roundtable. Marc Renouf, a writer on the Tharda Project, joins us alongside Brent Bailey, editor for the hardbacks, with returning guest Kerry Mould, a seasoned member of the Harn Writers. We'll discuss why the Republic of Tharda is a unique treasure trove for your next RPG adventure and explore the process behind the updates to the original material. Enjoy. Marc, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Marc Renouf. I have been a Harn devotee for many, many years. I first got into Harn in I want to say it was 1985-ish. I was in middle school, if I recall correctly, and I went in halvesies on the original Harn Decks folio. It was $20, and I borrowed $10 from a friend under the theory that if he lent me the money, I would run the game. And that's how it all started. I've been doing it basically ever since then. I've used Harn in a number of different games, from one shots to long running campaigns, and used a variety of different role playing game systems. Ironically, never Harn Master. Most recently, I've been doing stuff with. I had a long running campaign that was run using Shadowrun 3 rules, if you can believe that. And recently, I've been doing a lot of stuff with Apocalypse World.
Very cool. And what's your current engagement with the Harn Writers these days?
So I've been with the Harn Writers group since I want to say 2010 or 2011. I first met Brent at Harnmoot in 2009. And I've worked on a variety of different projects since then, mostly religious orders and working with expansions for settlements and cities and that sort of things. My sort of focus is I'm the guy that always says we should follow the money. You know, if you want to figure out the justification for why anything is happening, follow the money. I'm a big fan of building in conflicts of interest. And so much of the work that I have done has focused on that and on the religious orders. I think the first article I did was the Order of the Balm of Joy, the expansion of that religious order. When we were looking to redo the Tharda Kingdom module in 2021, I had been the one who had been running campaigns and adventures in Tharda the most actively, and had done a lot of work previously with coming up with the entire sort of Thardic Senate and doing a lot of sort of thought into Thardic politics because they were germane to the campaign that I was running. And so when it came time to do that expansion, Brent asked me to do the lead on that, and I enthusiastically jumped at it. It was a fun project, and I was very, very happy to be a part of it.
And speaking of Brent, Brent, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Brent Bailey. I started using the Harn World setting back in 1983 when it first came out. When I was in high school, like a lot of people, saw it in my neighborhood game store. Mm-hmm. Thought it was really cool looking. Had it, bought it and snapped up other things as they kind of came out, but not everything. I was in high school. I couldn't afford to buy everything. So I had a couple of kingdoms that I purchased and ran a few campaigns for friends using at first the AD&D rules, and then we actually did one with the Warhammer Fantasy rules. In the late 80s, we used that. But I went away for many, many years and didn't do anything with role playing until actually the early 2000s, around 2005 or so. Something reminded me of Harn and why I loved it so much from 20 years before. So I broke out my old books and read through them again, and I was like, man, this is really cool. I wonder if they're still around. I had been completely out of role playing for 20 years, and so I looked up online, and it's like, oh, there's the Harn forum, and there's people still playing this, and there's actually been some stuff, a lot more stuff put out since then. So I joined the Harn forum and started engaging there, and then wrote what was going to be a Fanon article, and submitted it to a few people on the forum for some feedback before I did that. And John Scamato, who managed what is now the Harn Writers team, John managed the group that was the creatives for Columbia Games at the time, and he asked if I'd be interested in having what was going to be Fanon published by Columbia Games. So I jumped at that and I joined the team. And then a few years later, John left and I kind of took over managing the group. So that's, today I'm the kind of liaison between the group and Columbia Games. So I handle the scheduling of what we do and when it comes out. I do the copy editing, a lot of the substantive editing, the layout. I write occasionally, and I do a little bit of mapping. So I do a lot of stuff. But I'd say that the team management and production management are my primary responsibilities.
Excellent. And Kerry Mould joining us for episode 2. I want to give yourself
glad to be back.
Quick reminder on who you are.
Yeah, so I'm Kerry Mould. I am one of the writers with the Harn Writers group. I started writing for Harn in 2004, so this is my 20th year writing for Harn. I started off like many other people in the 1980s as a kid. I picked up Cities of Harn was my first book. I didn't even know there was such thing as like the Harn decks or anything like that. I just had the Cities book, and I used it for my D&D campaigns. And then I kind of put it away and forgot about it until 1999 when Harn Manor came out, and I saw it in my local game store and I picked it up and I really liked it and it kind of reminded me of something. So I dug out Cities of Harn and I was like, I want more of this. So I went on a quest to buy everything ever made. And then I got all that and I still wanted more. So that's when I got into writing Fanon. My first Fanon article was Lady of Paladins, which came out in 2001. And that led to a number of Fanon articles. And then eventually I did the Lorrainian and Peonian sections of Kingdom of Kaldor in 2004. That was my first credit. And after that, I did the Lorrainian Temple in Tashal, and it just kind of went from there. And I have taken a few breaks along the way. I took kind of a 5-year period where I was still involved with Harn, but I wasn't writing. And then I kind of came back and I've been writing even more now. And my most recent release was the Kingdom of Azadmir, which Marc was one of the co-writers on. And of course, Brent edited it and did a lot of rewriting and reorganization and made it flow better and made us all look good. With something like Tharda, which we're going to talk about today, all the writers in the group act as kind of peer reviewers. We look at what's been written and we give comments and feedback and what we like and what we don't like and what works and what doesn't work. And so each article goes through a pretty rigorous review process, and it makes for much better product. It really does come out better after it's been put through that crucible of other writers' critiques. So I'm happy to be here. I didn't do any writing on the Tharda product myself, but I did have a chance to read through it and comment and be part of the process of making it better.
Yeah, and I really want to dig into some of the process that this game system goes through, because it feels so much different from all the other publishers out there. So we'll circle back to that, but let's talk about Tharda, which is over this shoulder here on the map, right there. Marc, why don't you fill us in? What is Tharda? What makes it different from everything else in Harn? How do you describe it to someone that you're just introducing to that kingdom?
The best way to describe it is, this is a shorthand and it's a lot more complicated than this, but Tharda is Rome in reverse, right? So Rome was a republic that became an empire. whereas Tharda is the vestiges of an old empire that collapsed and just sort of regenerated itself as a republic. Essentially, due to essentially a religious war, the existing Korani order collapsed, and no one trusted each other enough to name a new emperor once things sort of shook out and settled down again. And so they entered into this sort of power sharing agreement through the body of the Thardic Senate. Again, it's more complicated than that, and the history of Tharda is, in my opinion, it's very rich, and there's a lot there that sort of describes why this part of Harn is the way it is, and it's unique in Harn in that, and in many ways unique amongst a lot of different RPG supplements, in that it is non-feudal. Under feudalism, a kingdom like Kaldor or Candé, the king is the tenant-in-chief. By law, the king owns all of the land. And the reason his vassals are called tenants is that they are just holding the land for him. They are caretakers, essentially. And they may have a hereditary title and some hereditary rights to the use of that land, but they do not own it, and they serve essentially at the pleasure of the king. Tharda is very different in that it has a tradition of private land ownership. So one of the cool things about Tharda is that, unlike a feudal kingdom, ranks and titles are not heritable, but land and debts are. So the way you get power in Tharda is by amassing land, and through that land, wealth. Wealth is what brings influence and power within Thardic society, which is very different from a feudal kingdom where it's essentially, breeding and family connections and that sort of thing. That's not to say that family connections aren't important, but it's the emphasis is in a different place for Tharda. The other thing that I think is really interesting about Tharda is that it has the only standing, it's the only nation with a standing military on Harn. So
except for the dwarves.
Except for the dwarves, yes. It's in the form of the Thardic legions, who are the sort of whereas in a feudal kingdom you'd have the knights and their men-at-arms and their peasant levy. In Tharda you have the legion officers and the legion enlisted. And one of the things that will catch people out in Tharda if they're not expecting it is, in a feudal kingdom, all of the fortifications are essentially the seats of power of the various nobility. In Tharda, nobles can't have nobles, quote unquote. People with wealth and influence can't have fortifications. There's no provision for a private crenellation license within Tharda. All of the fortifications are essentially owned and operated by the Thardic legions. So, the influential families, through their posts as legion marshals or cohort commanders or whatever, may have some, control or sway over a particular, place, but that's temporary. They only have that influence. They only have that power while they hold that office, and those offices, like all of the offices in the Thardic bureaucracy, are temporary. So it's a really interesting and dynamic setting, because the levers of power are not as staid or as fixed as they are in a more hereditary society.
So when you think about that Roman template and bringing it into a game world where a lot of it is based on 12th century England, France, that sort of thing, how deep does that go? Is it more of just like, we're changing the manorial system, we're taking a senate? Does it go further than that? Like, how does that impact like the daily life when you are playing a character that would normally be at that manor?
Yeah, so I hesitate to really ascribe too much of the Roman template.
Mhm.
One of the things I always try to remind people is Tharda is not Rome. It has many of the same features. We use it as a shorthand sometimes to get an idea across that, oh, there's a Senate, there are legions, etc. But in reality, it's more complicated than that. It really is sort of more tied to the setting. Um, what we sort of do for a lot of things is go back to first principles. So in Tharda, the first principle is private land ownership. So once we've said, okay, private land ownership is a thing, now we have to work forward through that and say, what are the ramifications of this thing? Now, your question of how does that affect the person on the manor? What's cool about Tharda is that because it doesn't have this sort of serf identity for common people, there's a lot more social mobility in Tharda than there is in a feudal kingdom. The rights and responsibilities of any individual citizen largely depends on their economic status, not upon their birth status. And so if you are a GM running a game in Harn, Tharda is a great place to start, because you don't have to come up with ways to say, oh, well, your character was born a serf, but now you're an adventurer, and how did you get that way? What allows you to travel? What allows you to carry weapons, et cetera, et cetera. In Tharda, there are a lot more ways that you can say, oh, your character is a Legion veteran, and as such, you have the capability to carry weapons around because you're a reservist. So there's a lot of little built-in hooks that allow for the kind of heroic PCs that we all want to play when we're playing make believe, right? And that's one of the things that I think that really sort of sets Tharda apart, even within Harn, as a place that's great for creating a party of adventurers.
Just one thing that I would add in that really has struck me when I've played in Tharda is Tharda is cosmopolitan in the sense that you have all the religions there. So literally, you have a Lorrainian temple down the street from an Anglican temple. You have open worship of Morgoth. You have Nevaeans, but you also have Peonians and Save Canor, and I'm sure Siemists somewhere, and Ilverans. So it is really a crossroads, both figuratively and literally, because it is the center of sort of the Harnic economies. You have the salt route coming in from the east, and you have the trade coming from Retha and Candé, and they're all kind of mixing and mingling together in Tharda.
And the Thard River. Don't forget the Thard River.
And the Thard River is an amazing economic engine, right? The boats are going up and down the Thard River all the time. So it is really a great opportunity, and because it's in the center, you can have a person from Caldor coming in as a merchant or part of a caravan, meeting up with someone from Retham, and you can have all those interactions because it is a crossroads. It is a mixing melting pot, and different things are allowed, right? This is one of those things, like Marc said, is that because it is not a monarchy, people can rise up. They can move up. There's a lot more potential. Still, money makes the world go round, right? So the rich families keep themselves on top, but an up and comer can work his way right up and weasel his way up into the Senate, over a course of a generation or two. So it is fun in that way because it offers that sort of mix that you don't see elsewhere in Harn.
Another mechanism that the Thardic Republic has for GMs and for players to leverage as well is the whole concept of the patron-client relationships.
Yes.
So unlike in a feudal kingdom where if you're a serf, you've got your manor lord over you, and sure, he has some legal responsibilities to you, but it's that relationship, you can't just like up and leave. That manor lord effectively owns you, and buying your way out or being able to move elsewhere or move up in the world is extremely limited. Your chances are very limited. But in the Thardic Republic, there's this huge element of who you know and who owes you favors and who you owe favors to.
Absolutely.
Is extremely crucial to how you operate on a daily basis. That, sure, you may have a patron who is, a wealthy landowner and you owe him certain things, and therefore he can call on you as needed. But he can, you can have your patron do things for you to introduce you to other people, and to, there's a lot, you can have more than one patron, you can have many, and so there's a lot of that a good GM can use that again as a mechanism for controlling or guiding the game, because it's, your patron calls on you to do this for him, and it's kind of he's going to make you an offer you can't refuse. So there's an awful lot of that. And, I know, Mark, you've run campaigns there, and I know that you've talked about that, how incredibly useful that is in situations, that are prime for adventure.
Yeah, it's to leverage a video game terminology, they're a built-in quest giver, right? And it's one that has underpinnings within how the society is written. It doesn't feel like forced or artificial. It's something that's just, it's how the society works. And one of the really cool things about the patron-client relationship is that the vast bulk of Thardic legal code is in ascribing value to like monetary value to the favors and responsibilities and obligations that are owed between people. And so if you want to change patronage, or you want to, essentially buy off your obligation to a patron, you can do that. Or you can say, hey, wealthy, powerful person A is no longer giving me what I want, so I'm going to go to wealthy, powerful person B and have them essentially buy my cliency off of my old patron, and now I have a different employer. And similarly, if wealthy and powerful person A sees a client of wealthy and powerful person B, he can make an offer to buy that client. And so, the idea that you have not just, a single quest giver, but potentially multiple, or that can change over time from a narrative standpoint, from, a GM running a game standpoint, it just builds in so much flexibility for what you can do and the kind of stories you can tell and the sort of narrative arcs you can put the players on.
And there are a number of tensions in the region.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we haven't really talked about the greater external political situation, but they have recently been at war with two neighboring kingdoms.
Well,
yes.
And I think that's one of the really cool things in terms of, as a GM, setting your game, where you set your game in Harn. And I know that you're planning to have a series of these videos about why start in Kaldor and why start in Candé and why, that kind of thing. One really cool thing about Tharda is because it is part of that triple there of the evil dark kingdom of Retham to the west, and the goody kingdom of Candé to the south, and then you've got Tharda right there that shares borders with both, and it has had conflicts with both, and those have had conflicts with each other. And so there's this super tense section of Harn that is just right for all sorts of role-playing opportunities. And there are factions in the Republic that want to see the two neighbors fight each other. There's factions that want to side with one against the other, or side with the other against the one, you know. So there's all sorts of really interesting things you can kind of get yourself into as a GM. It's like, yeah, I don't like those guys. So, you know, what can I do to, you know, how do I orchestrate things so the players, you know, go in this certain direction and stuff. And so there's a lot of really interesting things there. Where you started with this is that, yeah, just a few years ago, the Thardic Republic first lost a bunch of land to Candé, but then took back land from Candé. And so there's parts of the Republic that were less than a generation ago, they were Candé. So those people were, you know, Candean serfs, basically. Well, they're still working on the land. It's just they're no longer working for, you know, a feudal overlord. Some new guy moved into the manor house who's now, you know, and so it's kind of this, well, wait, we used to do things this way, but now I'm doing this. And oh, wait a minute, I'm not tied to the land anymore. I can actually improve my lot in life. And so there's kind of a culture change going on in part of the Republic, and it kind of lends itself to some interesting opportunities for role-playing around that, clashes of tradition and clashes of new ideas between what was feudal Candé and is now the Republic. And so there's just a lot of opportunities around that.
Yeah. The other main conflict with external conflict is with the Kingdom of Retham. You know, several years before the current timeline, which is, you know, in Harn materials is always the year 720 by Tusen Reckoning. A force of Agrican knights from Retham crossed the Gomeson River and took Themison Keep, which was a Legion fortification. That happened under the previous King of Retham. The new King of Retham has exercised very, very little control over this Agrican order, and since that time, that Agrican order has undergone a schism. And so now the representatives of that Agrican order in Tharda are no longer in control. The new representatives in Retham have not sworn fealty to the King of Retham. And so the status of the ownership of the lands around this fortification are in flux. And there are forces in both kingdoms who are trying to get resolution of the situation, preferably without sparking another all-out war. There's a lot of tension, both politically, but also within the associated religious orders. So that's another region, or another, you know, part of the of Tharda that is just fantastic, like rife with role-playing opportunities, because there is so much trouble that you can get into about that, and trust me, my players have.
There's a lot of like neat little things when you're playing with Tharda. One of my favorites is the fact that the King of Candé, so one of the major rivals of Tharda, he has a summer home like just off like one of the major Legion fortifications, like literally down the road from the big Legion fortification at Molerin. The king hangs out and goes hunting and spends his summers there, you know, without a care in the world. And he's like a day's march or a couple days march from a major Legion fortification. Like the options for chaos and you know, somebody kidnaps the king, or one of the little hooks in the Ibanost article is that the local barbarians regularly kidnap Thardic legionnaires, sell them to the constable of Ibanost, who kindly ransoms them back to Tharda on a regular basis as a form of revenue. So, you know, there's lots of fun little hooks.
And building on that, one of the key political players, Marshal Cronus Ellernin, was who was very very influential and was the general in charge of Thardic forces when they took back land from Candé. When he was a young officer, he was one of those who was captured, marched naked into Ibanost, and ransomed back. And that is one of the reasons he detests the Kingdom of Candé.
And yes, there's more. So to the west, we talked about you've got Retham, and then you've got Candé. But what about to the east? Well, to the east is just vast. It's just vast wilderness until you get way over to the other side of Harn to Caldor and stuff. But all that wilderness, it's not uninhabited. It's very much inhabited by people who do not like you. You know, there's all sorts of tribal peoples that live in that part of Harn. So, you know, over your right shoulder there, where you've got Lake Benath and you've got Tharda, well, there's that whole area right under the lake,
yep.
under the lake there, that is kind of a well, you could call it a choke point because you have to go through there. That's all tribal lands, and
I disagree. That's all claimed by the Thardic Republic. Those are Republic lands, sir.
It's all exactly. It's claimed by the Republic, but they don't control it. And that's a cool thing here is that, you know, the legions occasionally will go out and travel the road, or they have in the past tried to set up forts, but they've just been slaughtered over and over again. And so, you know, you've got another flashpoint as a GM if you don't want to have if you don't want to focus on conflict with Retham or conflict with Candé or conflict within the cities, you know, between the different senatorial factions and stuff. You've got all this area that you can have the legions against the barbarian type action. You know, you've got some cannibalistic tribal people down to the southeast, and you've got the very fierce warlike Tulwyn tribal people of the Athol region. And there's all sorts of different things. There's nothing around Tharda is peaceful. It's all right on the edge of conflict. And you as GM, I mean, we try to do that everywhere with Harn. Everything is kind of like on the cusp of action, on the cusp of catastrophe, that you as GM decide which levers you're going to pull. Where are you going to pull the straw that's going to break the camel's back on this or on that or on two things at once? You know, perhaps you get a strong tribal leader that manages to get all the tribes together and attack Tharda from the east. At the same time, you've got people from, you know, the Retham forces from the west. You've got Candé from the southwest. So you as GM, if you really want to make things really interesting for your players, you have all these different levers you can pull to throw danger at them or throw opportunity at them.
Yeah.
Both Sharan and Coronan both have arenas, and they have beast hunters who go out into the wilderness and bring weird and exotic beasts in, and they stage them in gladiatorial fights in the arenas. So if you want to play gladiators or you want to have beast hunters to go out in the wilderness, there is a ready market that will pay you very, very good money for some serious danger and serious personal risk of injury. But there is money to be made, and there is influence to be bought if you can do well in the arenas. So there's a whole, if you want to play gladiators, that's another option that Tharda gives to you.
Yeah, a little bread and circus. Mark, I think you wanted to throw something in there.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in that we haven't really talked much about the internal conflicts within Tharda, specifically within the Thardic Senate. There are, anytime you have 68 people of wealth and influence trying to agree on anything, it's going to cause problems, and there are going to be splinters and factions, and power blocks are going to shift and change. But there are sort of 5 established factions within the Senate that have very different ideas about how the Senate's funds should be allocated, how policies should be made, who should be in charge of various things. So you have the expansionists who are very pro conquest, although they have different ideas about how that should be done. Either they want to pacify the barbarians in Athul, or they want to settle the lands around Lake Bainath aggressively, or they want to just conquer Retham because why not? Versus consolidationists who are like, hey, let's make sure everything is working well in the Republic for citizens of the Republic before we do anything crazy. Then you have the imperialists who want to return to a more imperial style of rule, not necessarily doing away with the Senate, but elevating a member of the Senate to a more influential or autocratic role. Similarly, the monarchists, the imperialists and the monarchists have different ideas about how that government should be structured. And then, of course, there are the reformists who look at the graft and corruption and whatever in the Thardic Senate and say this needs to be fixed, but nobody likes them. So one of the things that I should point out is that within the Thardic bureaucracy, most of the positions are unpaid. So whereas in a feudal kingdom, you may have a sinecure that comes with some stipend, or if you're a tenant in chief, you get the revenue of those holdings. If you're a marshal or a magistrate of a province of Tharda, you don't get a salary. So what you can make out of that job is what you can wring out of it by accepting, essentially bribes, right? What's cool about the Thardic government is that it's essentially a pay-to-play kind of thing. Your players may need something from some official, and he just leaves them in the antechamber and lets them stew, and they've been waiting for like days or weeks or whatever, and finally one of them slips 20 silver pieces to his secretary, and the case is heard immediately. And that kind of a thing, that kind of difference in how the government works, in how money explicitly lubricates the wheels of government and society, I think is a really cool thing. And if you're a GM who ends up with players who have just amassed way too much money, it's a great way to part them from it.
That's always a challenge, no matter what the game is, right?
Yeah.
So I've got 2 questions for you before we move on to process.
Okay.
1, Harn is always accused of being extremely low fantasy. That is definitely not true. There's a lot of high fantasy stuff, but you do have to dig a little bit for it, looking in the books. Is there an example of something that's explicitly high fantasy? The arenas aside there with some of the Ilvyrian beasts and different creatures that comes to mind when you think about that aspect of the game world?
Go through the various settlement articles and you will find things that pop out at you as more sort of high fantasy elements. There are ancient standing stones and weird stuff happens around them and nobody knows who built them or why they're there. There's a place in Kham province where once a generation the settlement holds a lottery and the person who loses is chained to a rock out in the wilderness, and that person is never seen again. What's going on there? You have, while it's not one of the common religions, Ilvyrianism is very much a thing in Tharda, and the people of the Ilvyrian faith do make pilgrimage to Araka Kalai. And Araka Kalai is arguably, if you want to go the high fantasy route, it is where the god Ilvir lives. So in the Harnic setting, you have, essentially the seat of Godhead. You can either play that up or down however you want, but the hooks are there for you to use them if you want. Some of the religious conflicts, part of the schism between the two orders that are associated with the conflict between Retham and Tharda, one of the sort of key sticking points between those two orders is the theft of a religious manuscript that is essentially a treatise on demonology. Is that a spell book for summoning? Is that, there's a lot of stuff in there that it's little nuggets, but you can use it to dial up or down the various level of fantasy that you want to have in your campaign.
Yeah, sign me up. One last thing on that topic, or on this general topic of like the setting and things like that. This has been around for quite a while. You guys have done a whole bunch of revisions. You've written some new articles. You've expanded articles. What is in here for the folks that have purchased this 20, 30 years ago? Like, is there something specific that stands out to you and as like, oh, this is going to wow some folks?
Well, I don't know if there's like any one thing that would wow folks. I think that it's more a it's a very broad expansion that we
literally doubled the page count.
Yeah, the back if you bought this back in 1987, or bought Cities of Harn, which had Coronan and Shiran in it, each of those were a handful of pages, and the Thardic Republic module was 30-ish pages.
32.
There was very, very little information in the Republic module from 1980s about religion. There was, a part of a page, a few paragraphs, very little detail, just very broad, and some things completely overlooked. Well, in the new one, religion gets what, 3 whole pages, 4 whole pages? I don't remember what we ended up with, but we go a lot more detail into, well, just how does this church operate in the Republic? What does make it what does set it apart? We added a whole section about the prevalence of polytheism, of people who openly worship more than one deity, because that's not uncommon elsewhere on Harn, but it's kind of overlooked. It's not as prevalent as it is in the Republic. And so we really kind of fleshed out the economic picture. We fleshed out the religion picture, but also each of the major settlements in the old Republic module got a couple inches of text. It was just
a paragraph, usually
a paragraph describing not just, and it mostly just talked about who the marshal is and who the magistrate is, and maybe gave you a couple little facts about the town, very little about the district itself or the province. And so a whole big part of what we did for this 2021 expansion was we gave each of the districts an entire page, that it's not just one paragraph, it's 8 paragraphs or whatever it was, with an illustration about something in the district, whether it is some notable person or it's a scene or something. But just across the board, like, I would say about the only thing that didn't really change was the history. We left history as it was. We added quite a bit to the current situation, gave a little more, gave more information about the conflicts brewing, gave a lot of new section. Again, there's a new section about the movers and shakers in the Senate. That wasn't all really there. We had kind of explained the client-patron relationship to a degree that didn't exist before. We really got into what sets Thardic society apart. That if you go back between, the late 80s and when we put this out, if you talk to people, very few people used the Thardic Republic in relative to like pretty much everywhere else on Harn. And time again, we would hear, I just don't know what to make of it. I don't know how to work it. I don't know. It's different enough, but I don't have enough information to make that work. Now, people like Marc, who did take that information and did kind of think through, well, what would this mean? How would I do this? But a lot of people just never did. And so it was just kind of it's there, but I don't like to go there because I don't quite understand how to use it. It was very similar to what a problem Kerry looked to solve with Azadmir. Was you had Azadmir up in the mountains. We knew, it's dwarves. We know a little bit about it, but how does that society work? How do people get entry to Azadmir? How do you get accepted? Very similar problem that we were looking to solve with the Republic was the same thing as, how do I, as a GM, use this place? Sure, I had some of this text before, but it didn't really give me enough meat to dig my teeth into to really make it come alive for my players. It was just kind of it's just like the other kingdoms, but there's a Senate and gladiators. It was just kind of a wishy-washy and not really unique. And so that was really our goal with this newer version was, let's make this place shine. Let's really highlight what makes it different. Why should someone buy it? Because it's very different from everywhere else. And here's why. Here's what you do with it.
Yeah, to sort of build on that, I think some of the sections that are most important are the ones that give a sense of place. So following the template of some of the other redone versions of the various kingdom modules, there's a section on art and architecture and fashion and food and music and traditions and that sort of thing, and add in the whole section on the patron client relationship and how families and clans within Tharda kind of operate. That goes a long way to really selling people on how things work. I think probably the part of that I'm proudest of is the bit on furniture with the Tibbet. So like one of the things that is sort of unique to Tharda is one of the most prized pieces of furniture that a lot of people have is a little 3-legged camp stool that they use, because at some point in Tharda you're going to be standing in line, so you might as well be comfortable when you do it, right? So it's little things like that that really sell the spirit of the place. And then the other thing that I want to sort of build on that Brent mentioned is that, when we expanded the settlement pages, previously, as he mentioned, it's very, very little text on most of them. Those all have a full page now. And as we always do with those kind of things, those entries are just oozing with plot hooks. There is so much stuff going on, so many adventure ideas that are on those pages that any game master who learns how to read Harn materials with an eye towards spotting, this is the conflict and this is what I can build an adventure around, those pages are gold. They've got so much stuff in them. For that alone, I think the expanded version is well worth it.
That's something that's really stuck out to me, is like, words are not wasted in these books. So when you're trying to convey pretty complex topics or really convey a sense of place, but at the same time you're saying, okay, we need to make this into a hook, like how are you balancing that? Because it seems fairly difficult. Is this all part of the peer review, or?
I think one of the things is that as you work in Harn and as you you know, have write various articles, you kind of get an eye for what is there already that can be used to build a hook, or what does there already suggest that you could add in? You know, is there a missing brother, or you know, an incipient tax revolt just waiting to happen? You know, these are sort of things that you can identify and then weave them in. And as Brent mentioned, we try and put everything just on the edge, right? You know, someone's brother was just hung, and he's getting his friends together to sort out the local magistrate for hanging his brother, right? You know, but it hasn't happened yet. So there your players are in the midst, and you know, everything in Harn starts on 1 Nuziel 720. Nuziel is the new moon. The month of January is essentially, it's actually, I think it's the month of April equivalent. And everything is kind of hooked on that moment. And what spills over on the other side is entirely up to you and your players. And one of the fun parts to do is to actually have some of those things happening in other places. Like once your players start off in whatever location you're in, have some of the other things happening in the other locations, so that when they show up in Coronan, you know, maybe there's a riot going on, you know, when they arrive. Like, hey, what's all the noise and everything? It turns out that the Lorrainians and the Agricans are having a full-blown riot in the middle of the square, and the, you know, the legionnaires are trying to separate the religious fanatics, and there are people on the side betting on who's going to win. And you know, it makes the place feel alive, and that you're participating in it. It's not just sitting there static waiting for you to show up.
That's one of the tricky things about being a GM in this system is everything is in motion and it's paused right at the beginning of when your campaign, you know, takes off. You know, they're not waiting on you to show up and trigger something. It's just happening. And being able to pick that up and run with it is a challenge for a new GM, especially when there's so many things.
I would point out that it's you know, it's sort of teetering at a point, but it doesn't have to move right away. Right. You know, I mean, a Caldoric succession crisis, right? It's all predicated on the death of King Miganath. When does that happen? Could happen tomorrow. It could happen a decade from now, right? And it's the same with pretty much anything that's going on in any of the settlements. There could be some, you know, just about to happen conflict that's written as of 720, you know, first Nuziel 720. But if your players don't get there until first Nuziel 722, there's nothing to say that that conflict can't be at that exact same point, because your players don't know the difference, right? You have all of that inspiration material to use as inspiration, but you don't have to have everything moving at once. You shouldn't feel that you as the GM need to, you know, progress all of the plot lines in the entire world in the background just in case your players go there. Leave that stuff as it is until your players go there, and use it as you see fit. Obviously, if you have something happening that changes everything, you know, a revolution, a war, whatever, that may put a spin on the conflict that's going on in a different place. But realistically, you know, they say all politics are local. If a conflict is going on in a place, if there's a war going on somewhere else, chances are that conflict is still going on in that place. You know, those brothers or cousins still hate each other. You know, that official is still you know, corrupt and trying to wring every penny he can out of his constituents, et cetera, et cetera. You can use all of that stuff even against the backdrop of bigger, wider events. So yeah, I would encourage GMs who are using Harn to play with the timeline as much as they want, to use that inspiration and just drop it in as it's needed or when they need an adventure hook, or when they need an idea for something to happen, or when the players go to a new place for the first time. That's when that stuff becomes, I think, most useful.
And one of the tricks that one of a couple of people have pointed out to me is you don't have to start in 720.
Right.
If you want to know what's happening, you can start in 715, and you have 5 years of history kind of already mapped out for you, so that you can save yourself all that. The game has provided you the next 5 years, so you can play your characters along through an existing 5-year timeline. And then when they get to be the big and strong, important heroes, that's when 720 happens, and that's when Retham invades Tharda. That could be the kickoff. So you can play with that around and use that in any way that you feel fit. So if you want to start completely 100% fresh, then start in 720 and move forward, and the world's your oyster. Or you can back it up a little bit and use some of those resources that have already been created for you.
Yeah, because
that's a great idea.
You started off talking, an hour ago about the conflicts, and so that we know that as of 720, that in the 5-year war, that certain things happened, or we know that in the Cusim War certain things happened when the Republic took back those lands from Candé. But play that out. If that's an area that interests you, that okay, when you start your campaign, those are still Candé lands, and then something happens that incites this, that happens, and so you can kind of, in your world, in your version of Harn, maybe the Republic doesn't win those lands back. Maybe Candé does hold lands up to the Thard River right across from Coronan, and so you've got you've got a lot of things you can do there if you step back and play out some of those really interesting parts of history. I mean, sure, it kind of destroys everything else that's out there for you, but
it'll very much be yours at that point.
Exactly.
I've one, maybe two last questions. So one is you've done a number of these books, a number of these revisions. Have you felt like there's been an evolution within your process and in your
very
writing?
much? Yes. To the point where it's almost come full circle, because the very first, so all these kingdoms were published in the mid to late 80s. Back in around, I think 2004 is what Kerry said, that Columbia Games did put out an expanded or a revised Kingdom of Candé and Kingdom of Caldor, and they had some new information. They definitely were expanded. They had a lot more art than what was in the original, but then there was kind of a gap of some years between those and then the ones that were following that, the ones that with Meldorin and Orbal and Retham, to the point where, and then Chibissa and Azadmir. And as this group here, the current team, I don't think, other than like Kerry said, he contributed a few parts of Caldor. Nobody who was involved with Candé and Caldor is still around. Of the freelance team, the writing team. So when we did,
Orbal was where I first started working on Kingdom.
So we did Meldorin. I think I'm trying to remember the order of these.
It was Candé and Caldor, Retham, Orbal, Meldorin, Chibissa, and then Tharda.
Azadmir. And then Azadmir after that. But yeah, that was, so when we did, you're right, Retham was the third one, because Retham, if you look at Caldor and Candé and then you look at Retham, there's a big difference in level of detail. There's a big difference in the expansion because it was very much a, Kerry was one of the primaries. In fact, I think you were the primary on most of Retham. But there's a lot more to it. And every time we did one, we've learned. It's like, okay, so when we did Meldurin or when we did Orbal, it's like, well, what did we like about how we did Retham? What didn't we like about how we did Retham? Let's, and so I'd like to say they've been getting better and better and stuff, but now that Columbia Games has started the hardback campaign that through Kickstarter, that as we've been doing those, all these kingdoms have been done, but now there's going to be the hardback book upcoming for Candé, but we're actually circling back to Candé as it was the first one that was expanded, and it was the least revised, the least expanded. So for the upcoming Candé book, we're giving Candé the treatment that all these other ones have had over the last 10 years, that we're greatly expanding Candé. So definitely, the hardback book of Tharda has really nothing different from what was in the previous edition of Tharda, because that one just came out 2 years ago. So we didn't have to really do much to it. It was more just a packaging into the book with Shiran and Coronan. But Candé is different because it was the last really got a lot of attention in almost 2 decades ago. So a lot of work has gone into the Candé book, and I'm sure that when we get to the Candé book Kickstarter campaign, and we do a video about that, I can go into a lot more detail about what's coming. But just to answer that question of yours is, yeah, we have learned as we've been doing more and more of these expansions.
I would just say that they're a lot more immersive now. I would say it gives you a lot more information about how does a person live, what sort of clothes do they wear, what sort of food do they eat, and now they feel like very different cultures. It's not just here's 4 different medieval kingdoms and they're all pretty much interchangeable. They now feel alive and feel very different. And that was one of the things I was very proud of when we did Azadmir, is to bring the dwarves to life and to give them an interesting culture that never existed before. I mean, Azadmir was a very thin kingdom module, so we gave them a lot of brought their sort of civilization to life, and you can see that they're actually living a life and things are going on. Just because the PCs are around the corner doesn't mean that their kingdom stops. Yeah. And I like to think we did the same for all the other kingdoms as well.
Yeah, when we were doing a lot of the discussions for how to expand the Azadmir kingdom module, I remember, basically pounding my fist on the table and saying, I don't care as long as dwarves aren't just short, hairy humans who live underground. It needs to be something different. They have to have a distinct culture. They have to have, a different worldview, different outlook, different way of doing things. And I think that as part of the process, it being very much a collaborative process, I'm really, really happy with the result of that.
And I think that it kind of goes to a question you asked before about, that how do we pack so many hooks in? How does that, and really it does kind of tie into the whole process. And I don't want to, that's a whole can of worms to get into, is what our process is. But, we've touched on, on a bits of this, that, this review process that we have as a team and all, that it really, there's a lot of really smart, experienced people on this team, that when you write your draft, when you post your draft for the team to review, I don't want to say it can be brutal,
It can be brutal.
but it can be brutal. That
I'm laughing because I'm going through that right now
right
with
now.
Karaz
Yes.
Part 2. It's got a bit of a lambasting, but the cool part is that the ideas that have come from the other writers have already sent it in a new and more interesting direction, and will give it more adventure potential, and more make it more interesting, and make it a place that your characters will remember and fondly discuss. Oh, do you remember when we did this and when we went to this place and stuff like that? It gives that sense of excitement to the process, but that comes from really putting it through the grinder.
Yeah, that's the thing, that when a first draft is posted and you're just inviting people to poke holes in all of your very carefully crafted ideas, and they will find the things that, they'll find the nooks and crannies, the things you tried to paper over, like, don't pay any attention to this, I haven't really thought that through. People will find it, and people will poke at it, and it can be painful, it can be frustrating, you might want to just throw your hands up, and but at the end of this process, what I like to think that what we put out is improved by this process. And because we have so many, the people are smart and experienced, everybody is, I don't want to say wordy, but there are so many ideas and so many things that they try to pack into an article, that not only is the review process pretty brutal in terms of people really poking at your ideas and helping you craft new ones, then the editing process is just as bad, because your full paragraph about something may get pared down to 4 sentences, that it's trying to cram as many ideas, because like you pointed out, it's all about those hooks. We want just hook after hook after hook. So it's not, well, give me 2 whole paragraphs explaining an idea. It's distill that idea, distill that hook down to its bare minimum. Give the GM, give the reader enough, but you don't have to, just lard it over with all sorts of extraneous detail and all that. It's just like, leave it, just leave something to them, but just give them 4 ideas instead of 1 really fleshed out idea. And so it's kind of, that is where our process goes, is how can I really cut this down to fit in more cool stuff, as opposed to just really going overboard with this 1 or 2 things.
Yeah, and Brent hasn't even brought up the other part of the review and edit process, which is when you come up with an idea and you write it all up and you're feeling all clever about how awesome it is, and you post your initial draft of it, and 5 minutes later somebody's like, oh yeah, there's a canon clash with that in this other publication over here. Oh.
Yeah, that's a big part of this, is that there is so much published over the last 40 years that there's conflicts in published information. And so when we're writing something new and that is discovered, where it's not only did what you just draft conflict with something that's been published, we found 2 instances that don't agree with each other that have been out there for 30 something years. So it's like, oh, what do we do about that? Is there a way of kind of cleverly reconciling those, or is one of them just flat out wrong and we have to go back and fix that at some other point? But that kind of stuff does happen, but it really kind of, we try to be very careful about not counteracting something that Robin Crosby and Ed King and Tom Dalglish, that these original writers that put a lot of the things out 30, 40 years ago, sometimes they disagreed with each other between articles. We'll find that, we'll try to correct that in the current stuff, but we're not going to change it, in terms of, we don't want to make substantive changes to canon facts. We may find things that simply don't work, or that we're not really thought through, and we may massage those to make them make more sense. But we really try to stick with what's out there, because we know that as soon as we put something out, somebody out there is going to say, oh, but actually, that's not what it says over here from 1988's version. And so we don't want to have to deal with that, the nitpicking of, it's like, because they're right. It's like, well, that was the fact that was established. We try to stick as close to those established facts as we possibly can, unless we think that there is a very good reason to change something.
And I will say, as somebody who is predominantly a writer, I don't do any of the mapping work. Most of my contribution is in writing and copy and content edit. For me, the practice of writing in an environment where you do have so many sort of built-in constraints, it's challenging, yes, but I find it also immensely rewarding, because one of the challenges in writing for a setting like Harn is, okay, you have X, Y, and Z facts that are canon. They're facts. They're in existing publications. But a lot of times there's not necessarily, and especially if you're doing like an expansion or something, there's not necessarily a reason why. And I think one of the really rewarding challenges in writing for Harn as a setting is in coming up with the why. What is the situation, that has to be going on in a particular place, such that facts X, Y, and Z logically flow from those. I mentioned, going back to first principles. This is very much that. And all of the writing that we do, when we do peel things back to first principles and try to say, how do we make these various disparate canon facts mesh together in a way that makes sense, in a way that is useful to game masters, that doesn't break verisimilitude, and that offers opportunities for players to do cool stuff. I think that is the challenge. And if you can make it work, in my opinion, it's one of the most rewarding parts of the setting itself.
Well, so far, it seems that you're making it work. So I'm very excited for this one. So that is Republic of Tharda on Kickstarter now. I will link that in the description and on the podcast. We then have, I'm looking at the release schedule here, Kingdom of Candé, Kingdom of Shibasa, and Kingdom of Avail. And that is it. There's a light at the end of this tunnel. And so,
oh no, not yet.
Oh no,
yet. We got more. There's more to come.
Oh no. And that's in addition to HarnQuest.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
We kind of, right. There's the quarterly HarnQuest releases. So it's Columbia Games subscription pack, subscription product that's 32 pages or so every quarter. And that can be a settlement, it can be a religious order, it can be any number. We've been doing guilds lately, so it's just a mix of whatever we're working on. But yeah, then there's the Kickstarter, the hardback books, and so yeah, even after the Harnic Kingdoms are done, there's Ivinia, there's people have said, well, why don't you take all of those the bestiary articles? We want a hardback of the beasts, we want a hardback of guilds, we got a lot of work to do to put all those together, and we've got so there's any number of packages or that could be put together and sold in hardback form. Our team doesn't focus so much on how Columbia Games sells its products. Mm-hmm. We're preparing the products for them to sell. So if Grant did say, I want to put out a hardback version of the bestiary, well, Richard Luschek, who is our artist, he would have to go through and like, okay, I want to change some of the black and white art from the older ones. I want to make some new color versions of that. And, I would do the assembly of all the pieces into the book. We might have to, if there was anything that needed new text, if we wanted to expand on something, I'd get a volunteer from the team to do that. But for the book products, the Kickstarter books, the team doesn't have that much of an involvement.
Right. But I mean, I think there are some exciting upcoming projects that we're working on from the HarnQuest end of things that I'm really excited to see come out. I'm also excited to see the Kingdom of Avail be expanded and re-released.
Well, that's going to be, and Kerry's one of the leads on that, and I won't speak to it too much, but one really interesting thing about what Columbia Games is going to do with Avail is that, unlike all these other Kingdom modules where all the pieces have been previously published, so there was, in the hardback book, there was nothing big new for Azadmir, or nothing really big new in Tharda Republic. Candé is going to have some new expansion material, like I was talking about. Avail, when that hardback book is published, most of what's going to be in that book will be new, because
That's very exciting.
Avail has so little written about it that exists now that and so there's a lot of new material that's in development. And so we had asked Grant about, hey, do you plan to release these piecemeal as part of HarnQuest? So the new Avail Kingdom, then a new El Cheval, and a new Ulfschafen, and a new this, that, or whatever. Are you going to release the parts as part of HarnQuest, or you want to just save them all and release them first as the hardback book, and then make the pieces available loose leaf and PDF to people who don't want the hardback? They'll still be able to buy the pieces, but the first publishing of a lot of this material sounds like it's going to be part of the hardback as the hardback book, which is not the model that they've been doing on the other ones. So that's going to be kind of an interesting to see how that plays out.
Lots of work.
Lots of work.
But we're very, very close to the first draft of the Avail Kingdom, and that's about a over doubling of the length of material that covers the elves and who they are, and that. And we're gonna do some other site development, some new locations that have never been discussed before, and so I think people will really enjoy that. We're still a little ways away from that, so we can't comment on dates or anything like that, but it is already in progress, and we've made some really good advances over the last few weeks.
Yeah. Well, this is some exciting stuff. Why don't we go ahead and wrap things up here? This was a far-ranging discussion. I've kept you here far longer than I told you I would. But is there anything anyone would like to plug? Personal writings or anything like that?
When I'm not writing for freelance for Columbia Games doing Harn stuff, I'm doing writing for predominantly for the historicals and role-playing sections over at goonhammer.com. So head over there and check that out.
Excellent. I'm familiar with it. Great. Well, I will shoot you guys a copy of this once I get it edited up. And thanks for spending your Thursday evening over here. A big thanks to Marc, Brent, and Kerry for joining us today. This was a wide-ranging discussion about Tharda. You can find it on Kickstarter. I will link that in the show notes here. And we'll be back in a couple weeks digging into how to prep the Kingdom of Kaldor for your next adventure. So with that, thanks for joining us. Have a great week.